back to the Institute for Black Mental Studies. Today, we have a great opportunity, and I'm so happy the brother allowed me to do it because I know his schedule is crazy. We're going to interview, the Angryman himself, one of the founders of the Manosphere, and he's going to talk to us about not only his life, but how he came to that. So if we could, how you doing, brother?
What's going on, fam?
You man, we about to find out the mysteries and secrets of the man himself. So I've been watching since you were in the car. So years ago, I was introduced to your work through Obsidian. Obsidian was the first person I had met on YouTube, and then there was an open discussion he had me in, and you came in. Alan Roger Curry, BGS, all these people came in, and that was the first time I heard of you. And then I went to your channel, and that was around the time you were recording in the car, and I'm like, who is this brother? A matter of fact, and we're gonna get to this because you have a lot of firsts, but you were the first person I saw that had his own theme music, and I was like, wait a minute, how brother's got his own theme music, and it was dope at that. That was the thing that got me. But let's start at the beginning. Tell us about where you came up, where you were born, and what were the early experiences in your life that began the shaping of who you would become later.
Well, I was born in Las Vegas, Nevada. My father was actually uh, a sergeant in the Air Force, and one of the earliest experiences that really started to begin and shape my life was the fact that my mother and father had a dispute over me when I was, I think I was about 1 or 2 years old or something like that, where, the way the story is told to me, my mother basically told my father that he was going to have to pay child support and he was never going to see me again. And they got into this back and forth dispute. And my father ended up getting custody of me. And so I ended up being like, first part of my life is around military base and being around guys and, all of those different things. And from there, we traveled a lot. We finally ended up, permanently, well, not permanently, we finally ended up settling in between Virginia and North Carolina. But before then, I've lived so many different places, seen quite a lot. But I guess the first part of my life that really shaped how I, avoided certain things was the fact that I was not raised by my mother. And I noticed that because of that, I didn't have some of the tendencies that a lot of other brothers have.
Okay. Now, what age are we talking about by the time you're living with your father?
I was with my father from 2 until about, I want to say 7. After I turned about 7 years old, I started staying with my grandmother more regularly.
Tell us a little bit about that. How did that happen, and how do you think it impacted you at that time?
Um, well, with my grandmother, she basically, she didn't, she often told me that she quit work early. So she wasn't able to retire and get a pension or anything like that. She quit work early in order to help my father with me. And it sort of turned into a permanent thing because my father was always moving around. So I guess she wanted me to have more stability or whatever. But growing up with my grandmother was cool because my grandmother was, grandmother was born in 1922, so she was old school. And she's part of that generation that, get up early, work hard generation, save your money, those type of things. And, my father was still in my life. He would come around periodically, it's his mother's house, and then I had uncles that were there every weekend, getting me up if I wasn't already up watching Saturday morning cartoons, telling me, come out here and help me build this shed, or come out here and help me, put these roofing shingles on top of the house, stuff like that. So my early experiences, at my grandmother's, kind of shaped my work ethic and my belief system.
Okay. Now, at this time, obviously, you're in elementary school, in middle school. What kind of student were you? How was school for you at that time? And what were some of your outside interests, altogether?
As a student, I was pretty, I was pretty regular kid, like to goof off, and I was somewhat of a class clown. I never really liked school. It was always frustrating for me because a lot of the stuff was real. What's the word for it? It was too much monotony. I did not feel like I was really learning anything. So I would often get really frustrated with school. And, there were times my father actually would have conversations with me where he would always say, you can't skate through life, because he knew I wasn't really applying myself in school. Um, but I got average grades or whatever. It wasn't until I got to probably about fourth grade that I started, getting into more trouble, getting into fights and, things like that. And that sort of set the tone. I actually read somewhere that usually for young black men, they start to get in trouble around the fourth grade. And that was definitely true for me.
Yeah. Now, you and I share a love of all things, or maybe not all things, but sci-fi, uh,
Mm-hmm.
sci-fi comics. What was that like as a kid? What did that do for you? I mean, especially in school, like, was it something that, um, how do I put this? Now it's something that's almost kind of celebrated.
Yeah.
What was it like at that time to be into sci-fi, to be into artwork, to be into comics and cartoons? You mentioned Saturday morning cartoons. What was it like at that time?
Oh, it was it was part of the reason I would get into fights, because when you're a kid, when I was in cities, when I lived in cities when I was younger, you know, um, a lot of the kids liked stuff like that. They liked comic books, they liked Star Wars, stuff like that. But by the time I got to VA, it was a little bit different. Like the children there were not really into that. They were more into sports, things of that nature. They didn't really like cartoons. They didn't really like playing with action figures. They didn't like comics. They didn't like Star Wars. In fact, it wasn't until later that I found out the reason why was because, in that particular Black community, the parents didn't really allow the kids to really indulge in those sort of things. So, I don't know why they were like that, but a lot of the kids that I was around, they had to grow up really fast. So, when I was younger and I was into anime and Star Wars and different things like that, there would probably only be a handful of kids that were into it. So whenever we were talking about it, another kid would try to pick on us for it, or, we get into an argument about it, because back then it wasn't cool. It wasn't mainstream. But for me, it was, being a kid that had lived in cities, And to go from living in the city to living in a rural area where there's not much to do, it was an escape for me, to be able to watch cartoons or read comic books and, look at all of these characters that, have these extraordinary lives. So it was a little bit of an escape for me.
What kind of now you're talking about being in Virginia at this point, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What were the kind of things you saw in Virginia? How was life different? Was it easier? Was it rougher? Was there, what was the environment like for you, especially at a young age?
Uh, at an early age, it was fine because my grandmother had like a really big yard. The community that we lived in, the vast majority of the houses was my relatives because my great grandfather um owned about back in the early, I want to say the early 1900s, late 1800s, he bought 150 acres of land. And so that land, the majority of my family, when they got tired of living in, New York or Detroit or whatever city they lived in, they would move there and they would settle there. So it was always enjoyable because there were, a lot of kids that were my relatives and stuff. The only downside to it is that it was a very backwards thinking place. There were a lot of really racist white people, um, but they weren't overtly racist. They were, you go into a store and it's one of the stores where you got the guy that's working at the register, but you got other white people, these sort of country white people that just sit in the store all day. When you walk in the store, they look at you like you're not supposed to be free. They look at you like you're a runaway slave. So it was a very different experience compared to when I lived in cities where you have a much more diverse community. So it was, that was the only downside to it.
Yeah. Now, how long did you live with your grandmother? Till about what age?
Uh, let's see, from 7 to about 12, no, 7 to 11, I was in VA, but then right before I turned 12, my grandmother, she had started getting sick. And so she needed, a family member to be around to help her. So she moved in with my uncle in
Okay.
Durham, North Carolina. So we started living in Durham, North Carolina. And, that was a whole other experience in itself because my uncle, he has this thing where, he'll move to, you know, he'll move to like whatever city he moves to.
Hmm.
All you have to do, if he tells you that he's in a city, just go to the roughest part. That's where he's going to be at.
Okay.
He wasn't scared of anything. This is a brother that's fruit of Islam, NOI, so he didn't care. You know
Mm.
what I'm saying? But we lived in this one particular neighborhood in Durham, and it was rough. Like it was really rough. And I had just turned about 12 years old, like really rough.
Now, so you're moving into this rough environment, and your grandmother's ill, right?
Hmm.
And so I'm imagining you're helping to take care of her as well. What what kind of happened there?
Uh, well, once we got there, she started to get better because she was able to go back and forth to better hospitals. And once I got there, it was just a totally different experience for me because this was around the time I had started, puberty and all of that stuff, and had got my first girlfriend and got my first experience, my first gynocratic experience. Um, so it was kind of weird. It was kind of weird for me because, you know, in addition to that, you had all of the different things that was going on. I can honestly say that's the age where I kind of was forced to think in an older way. Like I had experienced things when I was younger, with Detroit, Michigan, Brooklyn, New York. But when I got there in Durham, like I really had to, because like when I was younger, I was kind of sheltered from it. I saw it, but I wasn't really out there in it. But by the time I got to Durham, I was expected to get up and go to the bus stop to catch the bus by myself through this rough neighborhood. And, my uncle, he's not the coddling type, and my grandmother's not the coddling type. So I was out in that community, in that environment, experiencing different things. Like I had one girl that I talked to that confided in me that, her stepfather was sexually abusing her. And I didn't even know how to process that. Like she told me not to tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody. I felt like I should have, but I had to experience that. I experienced I remember going to the basketball court with my friends to play basketball, and there was an older lady there that was probably like, I want to say in her 20s, probably getting close to 30. And she would always be like, ooh, he cute. That's my boyfriend. And at first it seemed like it was just playful thing that women do. But it got to the point where it was like, no, this woman was really trying to get at me. You know what I'm saying? But people didn't, people don't think that women are like that. People don't think that women can be predators like that,
Right. Now, how old were you around that time when that was happening?
12.
You were still 12. Wow.
I was
Wow.
12. I
And
was 12.
she was
Like
20.
I literally ran from her a few times.
Wow.
A few times. Like one time she had cornered me in the freaking in the laundry room and was really trying to get at me. And I was able to slip by her and run out of the freaking laundry room. You feel me?
Wow. Wow. And you're absolutely right. People don't really talk about how prevalent that is and how much it happens, because it's safe to say, you probably weren't the only one.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Now, are you, because you talked about how difficult this environment was, are you fighting a lot? Are people messing with you, or are you pretty much received well? Like, what's that like as far as that's concerned?
Well, when I first got there, one of the guys that actually is I actually found out, I actually went to look him up a couple of years ago and found out that he passed away. But one of the guys that was in that neighborhood that was a pretty tough kid, like he took a liking to me. And, because he was friends with me, because he liked me, I really didn't have any problems out of any of the other kids in that neighborhood. The only problems I would have would be from the older kids, like the kids that are older teenagers that, those are the only ones I would have. Anytime I was in, once I got to Durham, anytime I had problems with any kids, it would always be an older kid. So I always found myself, fighting somebody older than I was,
Okay. Take us a little bit through, high school. What transitions take place in your life from 12 through high school age? What starts to happen then?
Um, well, we continued living there in Durham for a while, and then we moved back to VA. We moved back to my grandmother's house, and I went to high school there. But by the time I got back there, I had an entirely different mentality. So by the time I got back to high school there, it was pretty much, I really didn't give a shit about school. And, I would do my work and things of that nature, but I was just I was walking around with a chip on my shoulder, like 24/7, like really ready to, just get it. Like that that experience in Durham really had a huge effect on me.
And where do you think the anger came from? What was really going on in your head at that time?
It came from the frustration of one, not really feeling like I fit in anywhere that I went. Because when I went to VA to stay, I got picked on because of the way I speak. I got picked on because of how I speak. Um, when we moved from Detroit, my father, I don't know what he did. He didn't get my records transferred from the school in Detroit to VA, and they were so backwards in VA that they didn't want to go through the trouble of trying to get everything situated. So they held me back in the second grade. And, you know, kids can be cruel as fuck. So because I got held back, I got picked on a lot by my cousins and stuff. So that was part of the frustration. It started, getting picked on because I didn't speak the way they spoke. They spoke with a little more of a country accent. I didn't. I sounded more like I was from, like I'm like a New Yorker because, I had lived there, and my entire family were like, my father was Brooklyn dude, my grandmother, all of them, so always, I would always get corrected if I said something that sounded country. You know what I'm saying? So I had to deal with that. Then, when I went to Durham, that was a different experience, with, then I had to go right back to VA. And, it's hard to live somewhere like that when you've seen so much of the world, because the people that you're around, they have a really limited view on the world. So
Yeah.
when you're talking about things, that you're right. But let's face it, if you're the only person
Hmm.
in a group of people that don't know what they're talking about,
Right.
you're perceived as the person that doesn't know what they're talking about. So
Hmm.
it was a lot of that. It was a lot of ganging up on me,
Okay.
not in the sense of people trying to fight me physically,
Yeah.
but in the sense of, because it got to the point where people in the school, they knew I was with that. I would fight, so they
Mhm.
would leave me alone. As far as that, it would just be the psychological stuff.
So the difference between living in VA at those different times, you came back way more aware of the world, more confident in yourself. You knew how things went, and how did they respond to that? Was it, did they acquiesce, or did they did they continue to try to play with you, or how did that go?
No, they didn't accept it,
Oh,
because
okay.
before when I first got to VA, I got a few cousins that are alphas, and I'm more of a sigma. I'm more of a loner. But anybody that knows, a person with a sigma type personality is going to butt heads with an alpha. So there was a lot of things that was said to me at that early age that really fucked with my confidence. So by the time I go to Durham and kind of go through all of these experiences, when I get back there, now I got a little bit of an unshakable confidence. And so now that I'm in VA and in high school, the alphas that I remember from when I was there before, that were used to kind of talking down to me, I wasn't willing to accept it the way I did before. So they had a problem with it. So that's when fights would happen, and, all of these different things. So,
Okay. Okay. Um, okay. So you're back in about what age is this, and around what year would you say by the time you get back to VA?
uh, this is it's around 14, 15.
Okay.
Because by the time I get to 15, I'm kind of back and forth
Mhm.
from VA to Raleigh, because at this point my father was living in Raleigh, and I was getting in trouble. I was getting in a lot of trouble in VA. not just in school, but outside of school too. You know, I was hanging with older dudes. I was, you know, dabbling in certain parts of the street life that I shouldn't have been messing with. And so it got to the point where, you know, my grandmother, you know, I never disrespected my grandmother. I would always hide whatever it was I was doing from her until it got to the point where she would find out about it and I couldn't hide it. Like you remember the movie Notorious with Biggie? You remember the scene where he's, you know, in his room and he pulls the plate out that he has some drugs on and he's cutting it.
Yeah.
And mother comes, he slides the plate under there, acts like he's praying. Like I literally lived that. Like I would hide everything. I wouldn't even smoke a cigarette in front of my grandma. But by the time I was 14, I was smoking cigarettes. See what I'm saying? So like I was doing a bunch of shit, getting into a bunch of shit. And she sent me with my, you know, with my father to stay in Raleigh. Now at the time, the school that he sent me to was another culture shock because then when I went to this school, it was a really preppy school. So the tactics that I would use when I was in VA was frowned upon in this school. So if I got, you know, in VA, I get into a fight, so what? 3-day suspension, it is what it is. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna go back to school. One time I got suspended for 10 days and, you know, they called my grandmother and said, we didn't realize that your grandson caused this much damage in the classroom, so we're gonna give him another 10 days, you know. But when I got to Raleigh, they wasn't hearing that. Like, you get into too many fights there, they're expelling you, they're kicking you out of the school. Plus, at this point, they start having police in school. See, by the time I got to high school, I was in VA. They don't do that there. But when I got to Raleigh, they got police in the school. You know, you get into a fight with somebody, everybody's looking at you like you're a barbarian. Just a whole different, you know, whole different thing. And, you know, I wasn't really feeling it. It was cool for a while. But this is around the time, you know, I started actually working because there was a whole other issue that was going on. When I went to start staying with my father, it was a different experience than when I stayed with him when I was younger. When I was younger, he was super attentive. We spent time together, all of that. By the time I got older, he had married this new wife who was, I think, really didn't like me. And by that time I started staying with him, he had gotten real neglectful. So it really didn't help that I was already like, he didn't know what type of street mentality I had. So, you know, he gets up in the morning, goes to work, doesn't come back until nighttime. Usually he had 2 jobs or whatever. His wife had 2 jobs too. They would leave and there would literally be no food in the house. When I first started staying with him, he didn't have enough bedrooms for me, so I slept on the couch. And then when he finally did get a place that had a room for me, like I didn't even have any damn furniture. Like I slept on the floor, you know, without a pillow, without any covers, anything. And I was still expected to get up in the morning and go to school every day, you know.
Damn. Okay. So did this last this way through high school, or were there any other major changes before that year? Before I say around age 18.
It lasted until I quit high school. It lasted until I quit because, you know, I was staying there and I would get up in the morning, I would go to school and I would come home and there'd be nothing to eat. So when we were in that first apartment, there was a corner store. I would go there and steal food, or I would go to the freaking Italian restaurant, and the Italian guy in there, I think he understood what was going on. He would always hook me up with some pizza or something like that. And when we moved to the bigger apartment, my grandmother, you know, I called her and was complaining about it. So she came there and made sure that I had a bed, and around this time, my father took me to took me downtown to get a work permit, because if 15, you got to have a work permit. So I got a job at Pizza Hut, and then things started to be all right because I had my own money, and I could go buy clothes, I could go buy food, and all of that. But the problem was I wasn't really working part-time hours. I would get out of school, and then I would walk to work, and then I would work until almost 10 o'clock or something like that. And so what happened was, when I would go to school in the morning times, I would sleep through first period because I was so freaking tired. And it got to the point where I was just like, what's the point of me continuing to go to school? What I need at the time is money to take care of myself. At the time, I didn't need education, or at least that's how I looked at it. And, with my father, I looked at it like, yo, dude wouldn't even get me a bed. I know he's not going to put me through college. So I really didn't care about doing that. You know what I'm saying? So around this time, I tried, this is where I bucked. This is where I hit him with the, I'm going to quit school. And I'm not even gonna lie, I said it to see what he would say, to see if he actually cared, see if he actually gave a shit. And when I said I'm gonna quit school, he was like, that's what you're gonna do. I don't know if I was super disappointed in the fact that he didn't go off about it. My grandmother went off about it. But once I quit, it was just pretty much me working here and there. There was one little short period where I had went back to VA, and I finally reconnected with my mother. She actually made me go back to school for like I went for about a year before I quit again, and then it was just over.
Wow. Okay. What was it? What was the relationship with her like at that point?
Um, it was weird because I didn't know her. It was weird because I didn't know her. Like I really didn't know her. I knew my sister because my sister had went to the same high school as me, and I started going around a lot, and she knew that I had dropped out of school, so she asked me to stay with them, and she made me go back to school. She made me go back to school, and for a while it was cool because she had remarried a guy that was a really intelligent guy that really put me on the path to entrepreneurship. Like, he would always tell me, why work here when you can start your own business? And the reason why he was on that is because, he was from, just like my father, he was from Brooklyn, New York. He actually had a master's degree from NYU, but just like I said, that part of VA is so backwards. He was a really outspoken brother, being from New York. So whenever something was done wrong in that area, he would speak out about it. He would even write articles that they would put in the paper. So, the white people, that they didn't like that, so they blackballed him. He couldn't get a job anywhere with his degree. So he ended up, buying a truck and driving trucks for a living. And he would always tell me, he's like, man, don't, if you can't find a job, or if nobody will give you a job, make your own job. So my time staying with them, I appreciated it because it showed me something a little different, because both of them were, I guess, what you would call upper middle class, and they just operated differently.
Okay. So your father was more working class, and then your mother and her was it her boyfriend or a husband, or they were more upper class?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So how long did you stay with them in that situation?
Um, I stayed with them for like a couple years, like a couple years.
So you're what, about 17 after a while, while you're still with them?
Yeah.
What happens then? What's going on at this point?
Uh, I started feeling like I was staying with her, but I was staying with them, but I started feeling weird about the whole situation for a couple of reasons. One reason is, my grandmother at the time was in her house in VA by herself, and I would go visit her periodically. And I really didn't want her to be by herself, because I know sometimes she'd get sick and stuff. So at this point, my mother and my stepfather had bought a house. They had bought this big new house or whatever. And because I hadn't been around that side of the family for so long, they were just showering me with gifts and all sorts of things. And it made me really uncomfortable because I didn't want them to think that I was using them, you know? So like, I remember one time I mentioned something. At the time I wanted a waterbed. I said something about I was going to save up my money and get a waterbed. And at the time, like, I think the waterbed was like $1,700 or something like that. And they just went and bought one. And it was just too much for me. Like I couldn't deal with it. And so I kind of pulled back a little bit. I told my mother, I was like, well, I'm going to stay here sometime, but I'm going to stay with my grandmother sometime, not realizing that strained relationship from back then was still an open wound. So, she got really upset with me and we kind of had this falling out. Because my mother, she'll never admit it, but she's super controlling. And I wasn't used to that. And then on that side of the family, the women pretty much run everything. So when I wouldn't listen or when I wanted to do my own thing, like she really didn't take it well.
It's interesting that you say it like that because I had a similar kind of family dynamic. My father's side were mostly men. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
my mother's side were mostly women, and she would be in relationships with real, good dudes, but
Mm-hmm.
they would be short. They would be temporary, and those dudes would leave, and it was back to that. So it's interesting that you kind of saying that because I've seen that myself, but I've also seen it in a lot of other black men. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, okay, so you're back and forth between her and your mother, and I mean her and your grandmother, and then you have this falling out. Where do you end up going from there?
From there, I just pretty much I was all over the place because this is right around the time that I'm turning 18 and I'm just wherever. I'm just, going wherever. Sometimes I'm at my grandmother's house, sometimes like that period, I couldn't even give you an accurate accounting of between 18 to 20 because I went so many places. I was just in the street, just going here, going there, getting into shit, doing all types of things. Um, it wasn't until I got like 21 that I kind of started slowing down. Like when I turned 21, um, I got back into a relationship with. So when I was 18, I met my children's mother, right? And we started dating or whatever, and we had like this relationship for like a year or whatever. And towards the end of that relationship, we broke up, but we would still mess around. And she ended up getting pregnant by, I thought was my daughter, right? I thought that this was my daughter. So we kind of had this little drama where she's telling me, it's not your kid, but I'm trying to make sure that, I'm trying to do the test and all that and make sure, because I don't want it to come back and all of this. So we broke up. She was with whoever, and like I think around 21 we got back together, and we kind of went into this thing where we started, doing what most black people do, playing house. we get a place, and that was the beginning of my adult life. Because from that point on, it's pretty much me being on my own completely and having the responsibility of children, because we got together, got a place. By the time I turned 22 is when my first son was born. So that was just in early 2000s. That was around 2002. So early 2000s, trying to find work, and it's just a mess.
Well, this is around the time I'm first starting to listen to you. You would talk a lot about dealing with family courts, dealing with your baby mama, and all of those kind of things. And around that time, you know, I'm hearing. I think you were doing tattoo work and barbering. Was that around? Was this the same time period, roughly, or?
No, this was after. This was after, because while me and her were together, I would do little odds and end jobs and stuff like that. And it wasn't until we broke up that I actually, got into tattooing and barbering. In fact, I didn't get into tattooing and cutting hair professionally until probably we were no longer, we had been out of a relationship. We broke up in like 2008. I really didn't start tattooing, and I didn't start tattooing until about 2013.
Okay.
Like that.
So what were you doing around this? So you're with her, or you guys are kind of off and on. She has the first child. What, how are you sustaining yourself? What are you doing at this time?
Um, Around that time, like when we first started talking, I used to get a lot of jobs in customer service, and nothing that really panned out, because in the early 2000s they had this sort of boom where these temp agencies were hiring everybody, but they had a hustle going where basically they would hire you, and you would work for a company for the 90-day period, and then the temp agency would end your assignment. This is so that these companies didn't have to pay any benefits or anything. So around this time, I was having a lot of trouble finding work. I would do my little hustles on the side or whatever. And the relationship was just always strained, because, not to be too specific, because I've already, laid that out for everybody back in the car, but I basically went through a lot of the crap that brothers identify with now. Being in the relationship where, the woman is nagging you, annoying you, emasculating you. If you have a job and the job lets you go, then she wants to talk about you like you ain't shit because you lost your job. Like all of that stuff. It was a 10-year relationship where I was trying to, looking at it in hindsight, I had no business in a relationship. I had no business having children at that age, because I was still trying to figure out who I was. And the problem with getting into that type of situation is the woman is expecting you to have it figured out so that you can take care of them and take care of the children. So they don't have any patience for you trying to find your way, and they're not supportive in that way. So there was always, this constant barrage of ego attacks, and it got to the point to where, after me and her have been together for 10 years, and I've gotten 3 sons by her, it got to the point where one day I woke up and realized that I didn't even have an identity. My entire identity was this family this relationship, but nothing was about me. It was just about everybody else. And,
Yeah.
I just felt this emptiness.
You were just provider. You were just
I was just there to make sure everybody else was straight.
yeah. No, yeah, because I'm kind of going through something similar now. My son is almost at an age where he's about to, he's a junior in high school. And so
Mm-hmm.
now for the first time, he's about to transition, and I don't even remember who I am. So
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
so so you're going through this period. You're starting to feel like you don't really have an identity. How did you deal with that? What happens at that point?
Um, at that point, I really didn't know what to do. I really didn't know what to do. I got to the point where I was trying to start my own business, um, trying to be an entrepreneur, basically, you know, throwing everything at the wall and trying to see what sticks. And like I said, when you're in a relationship with a typical BW, they don't have any patience for that because they want you to have it figured out so that you can live for them, so that you can do what you need to do for them. So, you know, it got to the point where her being frustrated with me was always causing an argument or causing a disagreement. Me not understanding because I have a little more patience for my process or for the process in general of trying to achieve something. And it just got to the point where the arguments was causing too much stress on me to where I started really feeling it physically. And so, one day I did the one thing that I didn't want to do, which is I just said, look, we can't do this no more. Broke up. And it really hurt because I was used to being around my children every day. And I was smart enough to know that once we broke up, as bad as it was in that relationship, it was going to be much worse. Like I knew I was going to have to deal with the child support issue. I knew I was going to have to deal with all of the foolishness that comes with that. But, I kind of was stuck in between a rock and a hard place. Like, what am I going to do? Am I gonna separate myself from this situation and go through what I have to go through so that I can continue to live? Or am I going to stay in this situation and be stressed into an early grave?
Yeah, you could feel it draining the life out of you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, I made that choice. And for the first little part, because when she left, at the time we had a 3-bedroom apartment. So now it's all on me to, now I'm there by myself. And I really didn't have a sufficient way of paying for everything. So I ended up losing the apartment, ended up going back to VA to stay, because at the time we were living in Raleigh, went back to VA to stay with my grandmother, defeated. Only thing I had, it was so bad that I didn't even have money to get the freaking to get a U-Haul to get my furniture and stuff. So some of the furniture I just let it go. And I went back there and I was kind of lost for a second. I didn't know what I was gonna do. And I kind of said, you know what, I need to focus on myself and I need to move on with my life. And this is when I started, like, anytime I've ever gotten into a lost space where I didn't know what to do, I would always I didn't really go to family members for advice because family members can be really pessimistic. So what I would do at that time is I would try to get knowledge from, books. I would try to go and read, any book by anybody that went through something similar. And one of the books that helped me around that time was The Pursuit of Happiness. The Pursuit of Happiness. So I read that book. And after I read that book, I said, shit, I don't have it that bad. And it kind of put me in a space to where I was a little more optimistic about my situation. And I just started doing some of the things that I had read in a lot of different books. I started writing down my goals every day, the things I wanted to accomplish. There was a bunch of things that I did that really helped me to move forward and start to actually see some progress.
It's a trip. When I talk to young brothers that have gone through anything like that, most have ended up having to go inside and do time for a little while. Does it ever, when you look back on it now, do you ever trip out on how close you may have come at different times to actually, getting in trouble and having your whole life go a whole different direction?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really trip about it because the way I look at it with going inside, like I have so many family members, like I'm one of the only boys in my family that didn't do a bid. Um, or at least the ones that were, partaking in street life. But, I not to be insulting, but a lot of the guys I grew up around were not as bright as me. So, where I would see a cliff, they wouldn't. So they would take off running and fall off the cliff. I would never fall off the cliff because I knew where the edge was. So I would push it to the limit. If I was out doing shit, I would always get right to the edge and stop. So I never really worried too much about that. I came close one time. One time I came really close. I came really close. But I got lucky in that situation. And that was one of the times where I started to really wake up to my situation and said, you know what, I need to do something different because I didn't want to do that. Plus, another thing that kept me from going over that edge was I was always afraid that if I got locked up and had to do a bid, it would kill my grandmother. I was terrified of that. I was like, if I have to do a prison bid, it's gonna worry my grandmother to death. So I kind of avoided it because of that.
Okay. And did that have anything to do with the fact that she knew what you were capable of? Did you feel like you would have let her down in that sense, or what do you think that was?
Well, like, my grandmother had 4 boys. I was like her 5th boy.
Okay.
And she pretty much had been one of my main caregivers since I was 2 or 3 years old.
Okay.
And she would, regardless of where I went, she would always worry about me.
Okay.
She would
Okay.
always worry about me. So I knew that if some of the guys that I grew up around, like their parents didn't give a shit if they did a bid. Like some of their parents would shit if they cut up too much shit. They would send them. They would send them to freaking juvenile detention centers and shit. So they didn't really care. But I knew my grandmother cared. I knew that if I had to do a bid or something like that, I knew it would worry her and stress her. And my grandmother wasn't young. When I was a kid, she was 70. You know
Oh,
what I'm
wow.
saying?
Okay.
So, I'm still surprised that my grandmother lived. My grandmother lived to be 90 something.
Wow.
Yeah.
How long ago did she pass?
2018, the end of 2008. No,
Oh, just 3 years ago.
the beginning of 2000, it was the end of 2017 when she really, really got sick. She died right at the beginning of 2018.
So you were already on YouTube when she passed.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, Now I've heard rumors that you were in the Nation of Islam at one point. Is that true or no? Or
Yeah, that was when I was That was at the beginning of my relationship with my kid's mother. Like we both
Mm.
in there for a little while.
Oh,
But
both you were. Okay.
yeah, yeah, we both were in there because I, you know, I was living in Raleigh. I had my first apartment, and my uncle, that I was talking about that I lived with in Durham, he had came to visit, and at the time he was really going hard in the paint in the nation, and he was like, "Yo, you need to come to the mosque. You need to come to the mosque. You need to come to the mosque." And at the time, I was really on my conscious type stuff, and so everything he was saying was right up my alley. So I went, and at the time my kid's mother would listen to me because around that time I was actually making enough money to take care of everything. So she followed me, to go into the nation or whatever. And I also thought it would help with our relationship. And so we did that for a little while, and until things kind of got bad financially. Then things kind of went to shit.
Did it help with the relationship part before things went bad financially?
It helped a little bit.
A little bit.
It
Having
helped.
that structure.
Yeah, it helped because of the structure, but it also helped because if you have when you're in a nation, if you have a huge disagreement with your significant other, you can actually go to the minister of whatever temple you go to,
Right.
and
Right.
him
Yeah.
and the head sister, they would mediate. So they would sit down with you and have a conversation and mediate and try to help you resolve whatever issue it is.
Wow. Okay. I can see how that would be helpful because
Yeah,
I never had that. But
yeah,
okay, so you're going through this time period where you've read The Pursuit of Happiness. You're actually pursuing different interests on your own while still having to deal with child support. Take us through what happens with you after that. Like what is it that you go through that period? Does that lead us to the barbering, the tattooing? Like what's that transitional period like?
well, after around 2009, I got into the relationship with um with my girl that I'm in a relationship with now. And that relationship was cool for a while during that time because it was totally different from what I had experienced before. Like it wasn't no huge arguments that lead to a physical confrontation, and you know there's no nitpicking. And like with the relationship with my kid's mother, like I would wake up with anxiety because I would wake up and wonder what's the argument going to be about today. But with the new relationship, it wasn't like that. It was cool. And I was able to, find a decent paying job at the time. And, I was still dealing with the child support issues and stuff like that now more than ever. Because before I got in a relationship, there was no child support order. But the moment I got in a relationship, here comes the child support order. And the relationship was cool for a while, but then it got to the point to where the job I had let me go over some bullshit. And so now I'm in a situation where I got child support on my head. I don't have a job, all of these different things. And I was feeling really defeated, and it was causing a strain on the relationship because here I am, in a household. I'm not able to provide anything. I'm not able to pay half of anything or any of this shit. And I was just stressing a lot about a lot of things that I was frustrated about that I seemed to not have any type of outlet for. And so I decided to leave. I'm like, I can't stay in this situation. And so me and her broke up at the time. And around this time, my father, he had moved back from California because he had stayed out in San Francisco for a while, but he had moved back to Raleigh. So I went and I slept on his floor for a while until I could get myself together. And this is around the time I started really consuming a lot of red pill content that seemed to be helping, because I could identify with what was going on. Now, at the time, it was only the original Manosphere. I would go on to what is it, Honey Badger Radio.
Okay, yeah,
And so I've had conversations with Dr. Paul Elam.
What year roughly are we looking at this point?
At that point, I want to say 2000, somewhere around 2011. Somewhere around 2011, if I'm not mistaken. I even had a few emails back and forth with Dr. Tara Palmontier about some of the things that I was going through with child support, and because I used to frequent a Shrink for Men, that particular website, heavy. And then, one day I just decided, you know what, I'm tired of feeling the way I feel. I need to express myself. So I actually wrote an article and submitted it to A Voice for Men, and they had actually published it. And, what I noticed about that particular sphere was, you could, as long as you were talking about male issues and what men go through, because I had went through the child support thing and all of that, and was still going through it, and it went through being around abusive women and all of that crap.
Yeah.
But the problem was, if you delved into the black aspect of it, they didn't really want to hear it. Like, it wasn't like they was like, you can't talk about that, but you start talking about the black thing, and then everybody gets quiet. And it's a subject, So, I got frustrated with that. And around this time, I had ended up getting into a new relationship and got married. And this relationship was cool for a little while. We shouldn't have got married because we really didn't know each other that well. But at the time, the woman was super submissive, and I thought everything was cool and all of that. And this is around the time I started my first YouTube channel. This is around 2012.
Okay.
Yes.
So now were you Angryman then, or what were you operating under at that time?
Yeah, I was Angryman.
Okay. So you came out with that.
Yeah.
Early on. All right.
Yeah. But I wasn't talking about, even though I was red pill at the time, I wasn't talking about red pill stuff. When I started that first channel, I pretty much was venting about things like, I think my first video that I really went off and got a lot of attention was I did a rant about Christopher Nolan's Batman.
Okay.
And I would talk about that. I would talk about some of the stuff I talk about now as it pertains to like pop culture and stuff like that. But I would give my opinion on the things that was frustrating me. I even did a top 10. I did a top 10 women on television that I can't stand, and I basically showed a top 10 of all of the women that are on television shows that display these gynocentric behaviors. Like I put Raymond's wife up there from Everybody Loves Raymond. I put Skylar White from Breaking Bad. I think I put Roseanne Barr. Like I would vent about that, but I hadn't really touched on what was really bothering me. I just was kind of nipping at it. But I ended up shutting down that channel because I went through some more stupid shit. But
well, before you transition to that, where did Angryman come from? Like, how did you even come up with that?
Angryman came from a friend of mine. Like when I was 19, and I was at one point I was staying at my father's house in Raleigh at 19, and I had got a job selling Kirby's door to door. And while I was working there, I met a guy. He comes to my show sometime, Israel, who ended up becoming a real close friend of mine. So we was really cool. We started hanging out and kicking it, and he was from Brooklyn, and we could really relate on a lot of different levels. And one day he says, "Yeah, my cousin," he said, "my younger brother's about to move down, from Brooklyn. Let's, I got to go pick him up from the airport, whatever, right?" So he went and got his younger brother, and all of us started hanging out. And whenever I would see women do something messed up, like if I saw something feminist happen or anything that even remotely looked gynocentric, I would vent to them about it. Like, so what I do on YouTube, I would basically do with them. I would be like, "Man, this is messed up, da, 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 da." And my friend's younger brother, he would say, "Damn, man, why you so angry? You the angry man. I'm gonna call you Angryman." And so he just started calling me, he would call me Angryman all the time. He called me Angryman, and he would call me Valdez because my name is Juan. So he's Juan Valdez, you know what I'm saying? So
Okay.
the time I started the channel, when I got ready to start the channel, I said, "What am I gonna call it?" I said, "You know what? I'm gonna call it Angryman."
Now, based on the time frame, it seems like now, because I'm understanding the manosphere, particularly, what people refer to as the Black manosphere, had waves. And it seemed to me like you actually came in during the first period, if you're talking about 2012. Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about um, defining the Black manosphere, because it's my understanding that was something you had a strong hand in.
Mm-hmm.
And tell us about the different periods and where you fit in all of that.
Well, before I became a YouTuber, when I started getting heavy into red pill content, because I didn't even know it existed. But when I found it, like around the time I wrote the article for Voice for Men, I didn't know Obsidian at the time, but I think around the same time he was kind of getting into the manosphere as well. So by the time I started my first channel, I didn't really dive into that, but I knew about guys like Tommy Sotomayor, Sarge Willie Pete, K Soul and Black, these different guys. I would listen to them, but I never really interacted with any of them. So when I was in that marriage, the marriage ended in a very messed up way. The woman who had claimed to, who was claiming to be submissive and all of those different things, when it was time for it to end, she literally tried to get me locked up, try to say that I was hitting her or something crazy like that. Funny thing about it is I actually was recording because I was so used to that type of thing. I was recording with my phone. So when the police came and she ran out there, "Oh, he hit me." I showed the cop the recording, and black guy, he was like, "Well, I'm not gonna take you to jail or whatever." But then a white cop came, and the woman I was with was Black and Puerto Rican, but she was real fair skinned. She could pass for white. So he was like, "Well, somebody's going to jail." And at the time I was living in Greensboro, they have like this policy that when they come out for a domestic issue, somebody has to go to jail. So since they couldn't just take me to jail, they took us both to jail, which I guess was their compromise or whatever, right? So, after that BS, that relationship ended. And at this point, I was just frustrated completely with life, with women, with child support issues. I was just completely frustrated. And I went back to VA and, defeated again, went back to VA, went to my grandmother's house, was sleeping on a little cot in this little small room, angry than the motherfucker. And, I would go back and forth from her house to my sister's house. And, my sister's boyfriend at the time, who's from Yonkers, he had a homeboy that was in the Bronx that had started a tattoo shop and was making good money. And so my sister's boyfriend was like, yo, man, my homeboy making mad money tattooing. He's like, do you know how to draw? And he's like, man, you know how to draw. You could freaking tattoo or whatever. I was like, man, I ain't trying to be no tattoo artist. He's like, man, if I had skills like you, I'd be a tattoo artist. He's like, yo, we ought to become tattoo artists. So I said, screw it. Because at the time, after that relationship ended and I stopped doing my YouTube thing, I shut down the channel. I didn't have any money. I went back to the street. I went back to doing what I was doing to make money. And I was doing it, but I was like, man, I can't keep doing this because it's going to get me caught up. You know what I'm saying? It's going to get me hemmed up. So when he presented that, I really didn't have nothing else available to me. So I was like, fuck it. You know what? I'm going to take this last little bit of money that I got, because there was a situation that happened where I lost a bunch of, let's just say, stuff. And I had some money left over that I had stacked up. And I said, you know what? I'm going to take this money and I'm going to buy this tattoo equipment and I'm going to try it. So I took the money I bought. I didn't even know what the hell I was doing. I took the money, I bought the tattoo equipment. I went on YouTube, looked up some tutorials, watched a couple of the shows like Miami Ink and tried to absorb as much information as I could. My sister's boyfriend and a few of my homeboys actually let me practice on them. And, I just started, advertising. I started using Instagram to advertise, Instagram and Facebook, where I got some of my first customers. And, for like a little while, for about 6 months or something like that, I was in VA tattooing, tattooing people here and there. And then me and my girl that I'm with now, we ended up getting back together. And I came back to Raleigh, and there was a brother out in Durham that had a tattoo spot that gave me a shot. And I went out there and started tattooing. And so that's where the tattooing thing came from, and around the same time, I tattooed for a little while. And around that time, I was doing videos, but I wasn't posting the videos to YouTube. I was recording videos of me ranting about shit. And sometimes I would put them on Facebook. Sometimes I would put them on Instagram. I don't know what it was. I just had this thing about YouTube because I had tried it that first time. There wasn't no money in it.
Okay.
There wasn't no money in it, like not the way it is now,
Right.
And I was frustrated with it. So I just, I was just venting to vent because I had to vent some kind of way. Because I was, still going through some different things or whatever. So around that time, I'm back and forth from VA to my girl's house down here. And, I had a few little issues with the tattoo thing or whatever. And it was bringing me decent money, but it wasn't stable money. It was like I make some money here and then I might have a dry spell where I'm not making enough. It wasn't enough for me to sustain what I was doing. I still got child support on my head, all of this stupid stuff. So, my sister's boyfriend again, he says to me, he's like, yo, you know how to cut hair? I was like, yeah, I know how to cut hair. He's like, why don't you get a spot at the barbershop? And I was like, man, I don't have no license. And he's like, well, in VA, you don't have to have a license. You just have to cut under a master barber. You can be an apprentice until you get your license, right? I was like, well, screw it, I'll try that. And around that time that I got ready to start cutting hair, I was no longer working in a tattoo shop, but I was still doing tattoo parties on the weekend because I had enough clientele where they would hit me up, be like, yo, I'm gonna do this tattoo party. Can you come through? So I was still doing tattoo parties on the weekend sometimes. And I started working at this barbershop, and it was around Father's Day. And I'll never forget it because I was at my sister's house, and at the time, my sister just had a lot of people that was coming through all the time. And I went and got my boys that weekend. Well, it wasn't a weekend, I don't think, but I went and got my boys to spend time with them for Father's Day. And so I'm sitting in my sister's house, and while I'm sitting there, all of these, because the apartment complex she lived in was packed with single mothers. It's just single mothers all up in there. It's probably because they accept Section 8 or something. And she knew a lot of the girls there, and they was coming over to her house. And every girl that came in there, they were saying Happy Father's Day to each other because they were single mothers. And it pissed me off so bad. I said, fuck this. I got to say something about this shit. I had already ranted to them about it, but they wasn't trying to hear it. So I said, screw this. So I went downstairs. I got in my car. I drove to the Food Line parking lot, and I fired up. I turned on the camera. I recorded a rant on Father's Day, and I posted it. And like my pop culture videos and my videos about comics and stuff,
Right.
when I posted that video, brothers just was watching it. And
So that was the birth of the Angryman as we know him now. That moment.
Yep. That moment. That moment.
Did it surprise you to see how many black men, could identify with what you were talking about?
Oh, definitely. I foolishly thought I was the only person. Well, no, I didn't think I was the only person that was going through it. I thought that I was the only person that didn't accept it. I thought that all the other brothers that were going through the shit, they just accepted it. Like, fuck it. It just is what it is. So when I started posting that, when I posted that, everybody latched onto it. From there, I just kept dropping videos. Wasn't long after that I linked up with like Obsidian hit me up through an email, and I sent them my phone number. We had like a 3-hour conversation, something crazy. And from there, I started jumping on his Blog Talk radio show on a regular basis. And I was still dropping my content. I was still going through the child support thing. I was, getting threatened with being locked up. This is when I linked up with Chris Smith from the League of Dads, who helped me with that situation. It wasn't long after that, once I was at a stable barbershop where I was actually making money, I was dropping content, and O'Shea used to come to my chat room all the time, and I linked up with him from there. A few guys was telling me, yo, man, you need to, they was putting in my comment section, yo, man, you need to link up with this dude, Minister Jap, man. He be spitting that fire. So I linked up with Jap, and, I met BGS through Obsidian's Blog Talk radio show.
Now, what year roughly are we talking about at this point?
This is 2015. 2015.
So you were around when the first Black Manosphere kind of kicked off, but you really kicked into red pill content around 2015. Is that what it is?
Yeah. That's when I really started dropping a lot of red pill content.
Now you're considered one of the main founders. Do you consider yourself that? How do you see this whole period? What, were you kicking down this door and then linking up with other brothers that were doing it? How do you see the founding of the Black Manosphere and your role in it?
Well, the way I see it, there were guys that were putting in work before I came through, the like K Soul and Black, Sarge Willie Pete, Mad Bus Driver X, Thug Titian. There was a lot of guys that put in a lot of work. But in my opinion, even though they were talking about similar topics, I didn't feel the way I viewed it when I came in, when I started, like, I didn't even think that I was going to be as popular as I became. I had no idea. I didn't have no idea I was going to I wasn't going to get that popular. I had no idea I was going to make money because I was doing it for the therapy of it. Like, I was dropping content because I had to get it off my chest. I could not continue living in this world viewing all of this shit going down the way it's going down and not say anything. It was driving me crazy. So I was dropping content. It was therapy for me. And I started noticing it was therapy for everybody that was watching it. So I'm just dropping content, not thinking I'm going to make any money, not thinking I'm going to get popular. And when I linked up with guys like Obsidian and O'Shea, I viewed them as kindred spirits, as brothers. So I just felt like we all were doing the same thing. And I knew these other brothers had came before us and the women had did everything in their power to try to silence them. So I viewed it the way Lucky Luciano viewed the mafia. Like, why should we all be separate? And then we got to fight these battles separately. We should all be unified. We should all be together. And I just started calling. I said, we need to distinguish ourselves from the other manosphere, because when we're over there, it's like we're boys in that house because we're not allowed to talk about the issues that are more specific to Black men. So I said, we need to be separate from them. And so I started calling it the Black Manosphere, and everybody latched on to it.
Indeed. Indeed. So did it, were you guys shocked when you started making money? How did that whole transition kind of take place when you're doing it for the therapy of it, and then all of a sudden your subscriber counts are going up? Was that more strategic? Like, how did that happen?
Well, originally, like when I was, originally I had fell back from tattooing because I was full-time cutting hair. So as I'm full-time cutting hair, I'm doing videos in between, dropping videos. At that time, I wasn't even worried too much about money. I was worried more about reaching more men. So I was more worried about the view count and the subscriber count. So I was just trying my best to beat the algorithm because I knew that content was being suppressed. I knew it was being suppressed. So at the time, I was just saying, yo, we need to create an echo chamber, this, that, and the third. And so during that time, I had my little money stuff set up because when I had the conversation with Obsidian, originally he said, well, if we always structure our business plan being funded by the people, we don't have to worry about being censored. So that was always his position. Now, he didn't really want to take any AdSense revenue, but to me, I felt like that was leaving too much money on the table. So what I did is I basically adopted the business strategy that Obsidian had, but I tweaked it to my own suiting. So when I set up my channel, once it started really rolling, I set it up with my PayPal link. I learned about Patreon through Obsidian. And at the time, I wasn't really dealing with Cash App or anything like that. So basically, if I got any money, I got it from PayPal. Now, early on, there was a couple of guys that would periodically hit me with, $5 PayPal or $10 PayPal. And I'd be like, oh, cool. Every once in a while, I might make a $20 or something like that. Now, the YouTube channel, the AdSense revenue was making a little bit of money. I'd make probably like a couple $100 a month starting off. Like the first time I got paid from YouTube AdSense was like $200. But I'd had a YouTube channel for like a year. And then it finally started growing to where I would probably get like $800 a month in AdSense revenue, which is decent, you know, at the time for somebody that, you know, that's extra on top of what I'm making as a barber. And you know, I think I had about enough Patreons to get $50 a month. So, you know, I just kept looking at it like, okay, a little bit here, a little bit there. If I can grow this, and keep those little sources of income growing, you know, I might be able to actually make some real money.
Mhm.
And, you know, around 2017 is when I started. The beginning of 2017 is when I stopped cutting hair to do YouTube full time.
Wow.
But at the time, AdSense is booming,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And then AdSense apocalypse came.
Okay.
And so once the AdSense apocalypse came and everybody's money got cut, it's like,
well, explain what that is, though. Tell us what that is.
It's basically when someone put a video on YouTube that was like some skinhead content or something. There's a lot of hate speech in it. And because YouTube has an algorithm that latches advertisements onto stuff, it latched a Coca-Cola advertisement onto that video. And Coca-Cola saw it and went apeshit. So a lot of the major advertisers were threatening to pull their advertising from YouTube, right? So they started getting harsher stipulations on what content you can put out because they claim that a lot of advertisers pull their advertising, right? Now, once they made the new rules, I'm pretty sure that the advertisers came back. But at this point, YouTube is like, we took 90% of the advertising and they're still here. So why give it back? You see what I'm saying? So once that happened, people started making way less money in the advertising part of it. But in order to mitigate that, this is when YouTube came up with the super chat button and all of those different things. Now, before they came with the super chat button, when the AdSense thing first happened, me and O'Shea had a conversation about it. He's like, man, what you know, how we gonna do this, that, and the third? Because, and I said, look, we got to get the people to support what we're doing. So, you know, I was one of the people that would push really hard for people to support the channel. So I'll never forget one night I did a show and I think I had made $300 on the show, something like that. And O'Shea hit me up. He's like, man, you was cooking last night. He's like, man, you made $300 on one show, man. He's like, I wish I could make that. I was like, you can. I said, you got to ask them to support. We all got to ask them support. And this is when we all came up with this strategy, you know, where if somebody was live, like if O'Shea was live, I would come to his channel and I would donate because monkey see, monkey do. If I was live, he would come to my channel and he would donate, and it would get the ball rolling to people donating, because in the space of YouTube, the Black Manosphere being new, Black men were not accustomed to supporting their interests. So we had to really push hard for Black men to support their interests. And, you know, even to this day, I attribute that to the financial success of people like myself, people like Obsidian, people like O'Shea, people like Kevin Samuels, because we all was on the same thing. Like, why should we put out this intellectual property that people are actually craving and be starving artists or poor righteous teachers while we're doing it. So we just started pushing, and it just kind of took off. It just kind of grew more than we thought it would grow.
Well, one of the things, and there are several things. One of the things that sets you apart from a lot of other YouTubers is even what we're seeing on the screen right now. You always had a penchant for graphics, artwork, and you merged it with the technology, and usually in ways that most of us didn't understand. Like you would have things coming up on the screen, you would have counters, you'd have different. Was it difficult to bring those skills in, or did you have to go, actually study them and bring them in? Like, how did that whole thing happen? Because that was one of the things that we knew we would see if we came to your channel. There would always be some kind of innovation in the presentation, and most everybody else was just getting on camera, or really not even getting on camera. Most
Yeah.
people, a lot of people just had an image and they would just be talking. You made it more of a visual thing. What was that about? How did that come about?
Um, it came about because when I first started YouTube in 2012, I really paid real close attention to the YouTubers that were really growing. And when I started it again, I knew that I had to do something to set myself apart from everybody else. And I have a bit of a background in graphics and stuff. I've always been artistic. So I sat back and I looked at a lot of the YouTubers that had big channels. I even went over and looked at the video gamers, like the Twitch video gamers, and a lot of the stuff that they use. And I sat back and I tried to figure out a way to incorporate it into the show to make the show more interactive, because YouTube, it's basically a platform that is the new television, but what separates it from television is the interactiveness. Like if you're watching a TV show, if you're watching Power and you're watching Ghost, you're just watching. You can't interact with him. You can't ask him questions or whatever. So when I started doing my show, I noticed that because I can interact with the audience and talk with them while I'm doing the show, it's like television 2.0. So I'm like, okay, what else can I do to add to it? So when you have people that are willing to contribute and donate, I'm like, okay, they should be rewarded for that. There should be some sort of acknowledgement of that. So this is where I started doing the pop-up notifications. And, I just piece by piece started incorporating a lot of stuff from a lot of different things that I learned. Like, I'm gonna tell you this, and it's gonna sound crazy, but not to say the person's last name because it's a trigger word if you say it on YouTube, but that guy that was over in Germany in the 1940s that ended up taking over everything. I was watching a documentary about him. And, because I'm a history buff, I like watching stuff like that. And I'm watching this documentary and they're talking about his character, not the evil part, but how he was charismatic and some of the things that he did that caused people to like him so much. And one of the things, well, the German people anyway, one of the things that he did that they noticed is they said when he came out to a crowd that was ready to see him speak, they would cheer for him and he would stand there patiently and he would not start speaking until everybody stopped cheering. He made them wait. And I don't know what it was, but something about that just stuck to me. Like, made them wait, which I guess presented value. So when I saw that, when I started doing my show, I would put a timer up there. I said, I'm gonna put a timer up there. It's gonna serve two purposes. One, it's gonna let everybody know that a great show is coming. You gotta wait for it. Good things come to those who wait. In addition to that, it gives your audience enough time to come in so that you don't have people coming in late talking about can anybody catch me up on what he's talking about and all of those different things. And it actually worked pretty well because I noticed now in the Black Manosphere, a lot of people put timers up now.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that's the thing, even from myself to even Coach Greg Adams, and most people can talk about something that they pulled from you. Like for me, I've always been into sci-fi, action figures, comic books, and I've always collected swords that were related to that. I never thought about putting them on the wall until I was watching you. And matter of fact, you remember I asked you, where'd you get the sword holders from?
Yeah.
But you just had an ability to pull in things that people resonated with. And nobody else would really think to put those things together. But there's a period of time where people's videos start to get flagged a lot. And I noticed you changed your whole business profile in a way no one else did. Can you talk about what that period was, what happened, and what you decided to do in response to that?
Well, once I started getting flagged for a lot of my content, I said, okay, well, you know what? I took another cue from television. When you watch television back in the 80s, you didn't get to see the show over and over. You saw the show one time, and then you would see it on a rerun, or you would have to go buy a DVD. So I said, well, you know what I'll do, because usually what happens is you put the video up or you go live, and after the video has sat there for a few days, people start flagging it because they find something. They'll sit back and watch it until they find something that's flaggable, then they flag it. So I said, okay, well, what I'll do is I'll go live, and once the stream is over, I'll make the video private so that it can't get flagged. And the people that want to see the replay, they'll have to watch it on Patreon for a monthly membership fee, or watch it on my website, for a monthly fee. And so the way I did it is I said, well, look, if you want to see me live, you got to catch the show at the time where I go live. And that actually helped. It had a downside and it had an upside. The downside is when you don't leave content up, it will affect your subscribership, because the algorithm has nothing to grab onto to promote, because you don't have a bunch of content up. But on the plus side, this is why I tell everybody, in YouTube, you can focus on your subscribers or you can focus on your money, because usually you got to split the two, right? So when it came to taking down my content, it affected the growth of my subscribership, but it increased the revenue that I was making, because people liked my content so much that if they weren't able to catch it live, they were willing to become a Patreon member so that they could see it on the replay.
Now, how did you feel about the blowback that you're starting to see happening to the Manosphere? People canceling videos, people complaining, people calling people names from the outside in, like the blowback the Manosphere got. What were your thoughts about that when that really started to kick up?
I thought it was natural. I thought it was par for the course, because it's growing pains. It's the result of the Black Manosphere getting bigger, because a lot of times I associate YouTube with the rap industry, because it has like sort of this parallel thing. It's really similar if you really examine it. Like this period that we're going through in the Black Manosphere, this is like the period in hip hop of gangster rap, where you have this new type of vibe and people don't know how to process it. So now you're getting the critique, like the C. Dolores Tuckers and the Dionne Warwicks and all of those different things. But I think it's as much as I don't like it, I think it's necessary. It's just part of the process.
Okay. Now, after all this time, you're probably responsible for way more than people know about in terms of the different ideas, obviously the presentation of the channel, different concepts. Like you said, you named the Black Manosphere. What are some of the things that you've created that you don't think people really know came from the Angry Man channel?
Um, the main thing that I probably will never get credit for is the difference between I'll never get credit for the money potential of the Black Manosphere. Um, Before I really started pushing people to contribute, people would go live. They'd be lucky if they get $50. But nowadays, you have new guys that can come into the Black Manosphere, start a channel, and they might only have 50 people watching, but they'll mess around and make $100, $200. And that's because, me and other guys really pushed to make it a normal thing to support channels when brothers are talking about what we're talking about. I think that's one of the main things that I'll probably never really get credit for.
Okay. So you made it to where people could actually have a career doing this in the Black Manosphere and
Yeah.
be able to support themselves, feed themselves, the whole kind of deal. Um, hmm. Now,
Yeah. I was one of the only people that really um put all my eggs in that basket.
yeah, you've done something that I haven't seen since Prince. You remember when Prince came out? He did Purple Rain. Well, obviously he came out before that, but by the time he got to Purple Rain, that was huge. And
Mm-hmm.
then he did something I never thought he would do. He changed up his image, his clothing, everything. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember even as a kid, I was pissed because I was, at that time, if you got successful at something, you just kept doing it. You
Yeah.
change up because you'd lose your whole audience. But
Yeah.
Prince kind of did it and he would change. And then it got to the point where people expected him to change. We just didn't know what he was going to change into. With
Yeah.
you and your channel, one of the things I've seen you do is you're not afraid to let your channel evolve. You'll
Mm-hmm.
have a different moniker, different title, different visual imagery, and even the content may change up. And so your channel has continued to evolve. Tell us where it is now. What is it? What has the Angry Man channel evolved into? Or not just the channel, but where have you evolved your work into now? And how did you have the courage to do it without wondering if you were going to lose your whole audience over a change? You know what I mean?
Well, so the two channels that I have, one has evolved into a Black conservative channel where the street conservative, where I basically talk about politics, but I talk about politics from a non-traditional conservative position. So it's like if 50 Cent decided that he wanted to talk about astrophysics. He's going to talk about it from the position of a dude from Southside Jamaica, Queens. So I talk about politics from the position of being a street dude, because there are a lot of guys that come from my background that really are into politics and really like talking about politics or have conservative viewpoints, but they can't relate to an ABL. They can't relate to a Officer Tatum. They can't relate to Ben Shapiro, because a lot of times when these particular conservatives they tend to get rigid in their positions, and so they tend to be really judgmental to people that don't fit inside of that particular box that they believe a conservative is supposed to be. So there's a lot of guys that come to my channel, both black and white, even women that come to that particular channel to hear me talk about politics, because I'm not going to talk about it from a stiff position. I'm going to talk about it from a more layman's position. So I did that because, I kind of did that because I was getting frustrated with people not thinking I knew anything about politics, which I actually know a lot about politics. Is one of the things I'm really interested in, politics and history. And as far as my other channel that I recently named the Angryman again, I decided to take that channel back to talking about the gynocracy and the things they do, because I notice a lot of people are falling back from that as if that problem has been solved. So, the only reason why I've never been worried about losing my audience is because I understand the way the internet works. A lot of people try to do things based off of the old business model. And the old business model says that if you're doing something that works, you do that for the next 30 years. But the internet doesn't work like that. The internet is constantly changing. It's speeded up. Like for YouTube, a week in YouTube is like it's like whatever you do on YouTube is way shorter. It's kind of like on Ant-Man, where you go into that I forgot what zone they call it, but he goes into that space and the time is different. That's the way it is with YouTube. Like, a week in YouTube is like months in real life. You know what I'm saying? So like, if you're talking about something on YouTube, last week, it's like it was a month ago. So YouTube's time is really, really different. It's much faster. So because of that, with the old business model, you do something that's working, you do that for 10 years. But 10 years in the real world is 1 year in YouTube. Or at least that's the way I look at it. So I'm always changing it because I know that people's attention spans are really short. And so if you're not changing it, it's going to get stale.
Yeah.
And you're not going to be able to evolve.
Okay. Last question. And it's kind of a two-part. I was recently talking to Malika, had him up on my channel, and he was talking for a while, and he kind of brought you up. And one of the things he kind of helped me realize in that moment is he talked about you as a big brother figure. And then when we got into it, we were talking about how there's a whole generation of content creators that have become surrogate big brothers, sometimes to men older than them, and fathers. You guys, become father figures, surrogate big brothers, this kind of thing, where you have a listenership that really, listens in for that day-to-day guidance in a particular way. How do you process that? Where are you with that? And the last part is, what do you think the future of this needs to be in your assessment, from where it's been, where it's come from, in terms of, especially in regard to black men? What do you see as the future? So the first part, how do you respond to being an elder brother, father figure to a generation of black men, and where do you think this needs to go?
Well, for the first part, I kind of feel bad because, you know, when I came onto YouTube, you know, I'm growing in this process the same way everybody else is growing as far as, you know, their manhood, their adulthood or whatever. And I'll admit I engaged in a lot of stuff that I really wish I hadn't engaged in hindsight, because at one point, and I think it happened around 2019 or 2020, I realized just how much a lot of the brothers listen to all of us and how they take our word as law, and then they go apply it to their life. So, you know, I even went on a few rants about this on my channel, and I said we need to be more responsible with a lot of the things we're saying, because a lot of brothers are taking this and they're applying it to their lives. So, you know, I kind of toned down some of the things that I was doing. Like at this point, like I really have no desire to like get into back and forth arguments like I used to, and you know, all of these different things. And because like I told Obsidian one time, I said we actually have a responsibility, because there's a lot of brothers that they don't just listen to us, they follow us, you know. And you know, as far as the second part of it, where I see it going, I think it's necessary, considering the way society is, considering the fact that there are very few father figures. You know, we don't even have television father figures anymore. So the guidance is necessary. I just think that a lot of us need to be mindful of that, because I think a lot of brothers get up here and they talk and they run their mouth, but they think it has no consequences. I think that they believe it's just entertainment, because in their mind it's just entertainment. But you know, when you have brothers that, you know, part of the reason it hit me is because I've had brothers come to me or email me. You know, one day I was doing a show and I said, you know, somebody was trolling me, and it got me so angry that I said, well, look, like there's plenty of dudes that I've helped on here, and I'm just talking about giving advice as far as, you know, child support or, you know, something small, something minuscule. And there were brothers that started putting in the chat room, yo, it's because of you I'm not homeless anymore. It's because of you, you know, that I decided not to commit suicide. And when I saw that, and it wasn't just one brother, it was numerous brothers that was saying they gave up on life and was seriously considering doing that. And it was because they watched one of my shows, and I guess the message of that day was so powerful that it made them want to just keep going, you know, because they identified with something that I had went through, and I was able to come out of it, and they've actually been able to watch me grow from 2015 to where I'm at now, and go from, you know, this level to this level, and just keep pushing forward. So once I saw that, I said, you know what, we, you know, as content creators, those of us that actually have a large platform, we got to be more responsible with the things that we say, because the same way you could stop a brother from doing that, you could actually cause a brother to do that. So, you know, from there, I just think that it's necessary, because the whole reason that a lot of us started doing this anyway was to give a voice to the voiceless, to give a voice to Black men who have never had a platform, never been able to really speak truth to power or challenge any of the negative stereotypes about us that have been going on for over 50 to 70 freaking years. And most guys don't even realize that. They don't realize that this space is the only of its kind. It's the first of its kind to ever exist in this country. This is the first space where black men can literally in large groups express what they're going through and be able to identify with each other and relate and not feel like they're alone and just suffering in silence.
Damn, man, you got me even speechless at this point, man. I appreciate you coming on, man. I know your time is busy. Thank you for this. Um,
No doubt,
you
man.
know, because this both professionally and personally, I've been curious about, what life experiences, kind of made you into who you are. So I appreciate you taking the time to explain it. Um, and I do agree with you. I think the work that you've done has had a lot to do with the growth. And I really think most people, you're right, misunderstand and underestimate how impactful this can be. I mean, this is the evolution of both the Black father to some respect, and
Mhm.
even the television, right? Because that was my generation. We grew up with TV fathers because
Yep.
we didn't get to see our fathers. But just like you pointed out, with YouTube being more interactive, they get to interact with their James Evans.
Yeah.
I watched James Evans. You just had to take him however he was presented. They can go back and forth. They can interact. They can ask questions. It's a whole different era. So I applaud you for the years of doing this work and really pushing the boundaries, and then turning around and challenging other content creators to be responsible for what they say, and owning it. You know what I mean? Right or wrong, up or down, people like it, people hate it. Own what you say and stand on it, and that's definitely we can say something we can say we've seen Valdez push.
Yeah.
So on top of all the other innovations, I appreciate your work, brother. I appreciate you, and not just for today, but in general. So thank you, man.
No, man, I appreciate it, bro. I appreciate you having me and interviewing me.
Oh man, thank you. Okay. So let me transition real quick. I'm gonna take you down.
Okay.
So that was Juan the Angry Man Valdez, the architect behind the Angry Man channel and the Street Conservative. You can check him out on YouTube, and you can also engage his work on a number of different platforms, from YouTube to iTunes, and you can go to his channel and find out more. But these are the kind of interviews we like to do. To support and build the Institute for Black Male Studies, because these are the kind of stories that need to be told of innovative Black men that have all kinds of different backgrounds, but have managed to find and carve out their own space. And we want to let people know, especially young brothers, that they can do that themselves and take inspiration from men who've already done it. So thank you for supporting the Institute for Black Male Studies. Please reach out, support us on Patreon. You can look up Dr. T. Hassan Johnson, or you can go to YouTube, look me up there as well. You can support via Patreon on a monthly basis, or you can purchase merchandise on the Institute for Black Male Studies.com website. All right.